All right, welcome back. So we are going to be working on box number 4 in this video. So for box number 4, we are going to be starting off with HB pencil and then working our way to HB plus a little pressure. So we're going to start off super light, and I'm going to start up and down for this one. So I'm still holding my pencil back far away. I'm still shading pretty light, but right off the bat, it's going to look kind of dark because you're starting off with the HB and not the 4H. The HB pencil, you're going to feel that the texture is a lot different when you're initially shading compared to the 4H pencil. It's a lot darker. So I'm just shading in one direction. I'm going up and down. It's okay if you go off the square because you can erase that since you're shading pretty lightly. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade left to right, but that's really awkward for me. So I'm going to rotate my paper and I'm going to shade up and down. I do want to be careful. I'm going to be really careful not to go into box number 3 as much as possible. And I'm just going to shade up and down towards myself. I have more leverage that way. I'm shading nice and close together so that I have nice even shading. It's okay to go into a little bit into box number 5. You can always erase that later. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate this around. So it's already looking super close to box number 3. It's probably going to look a little messy just because we've only done 2 essentially layers. So I'm going to go ahead and start to just shade this in more. You can do a diagonal, especially if your shading is looking a little messy. I'm going to shade diagonally, and then I'm going to shade in the opposite diagonal. And then now I'm going to start using a little pressure. So now that we're using a little pressure, you really want to stay inside your lines. So I'm going to start off by establishing my separation line between 3 and 4. I'm just using a tiny amount of pressure. You don't see a distinct line, you see just shading up to that edge. So make sure that your pencil's facing the edge of your shape. And I'm just going to rotate this around and do the same thing. So I'm just tip facing the edge of my shape, and I'm shading it inwards, just a little pressure, and you'll notice that your edges are going to look a little bit darker than the insides. So tip facing the edge, and I'm shading that towards the insides. Rotate this again. If you notice, I rotate it every time because I want to have that leverage. So tip facing the edge of my shape, and I'm shading towards the middle. Not once do you see a distinct line being drawn here. It's just nice shading. Now once you have done all 4, I usually like to shade up and down this way, and then I'll like flip it and then shade it going up and down this way. If you want to shade diagonally, you can, but the more layers you put, the better the shading's gonna look. If for some reason like the edges really bother me right now, I'm gonna just take my eraser and I'm gonna set something on top of here, and I'm gonna clean up my edges. That way I can focus on my shape. So I'm gonna erase that. See, nice clean edge. I'm gonna erase this up here too. Try not to erase my notes. I can always draw those back in if I mess those up. And this is looking pretty good. I just need to really blend this out and establish edges. So I'm just taking my pencil, establishing that edge, and then shading inward. Not once will you see an edge line in here, just nice even shading. So as I'm shading, the tip of my pencil faces the edge of my shape, and I'm just pulling it inward each time. Sometimes if you drew your line a little bit too hard, you might have to establish that a little bit better. So if you notice, my hand adjusted to just kind of get in there just a little bit better. And I'm just repeating these steps over and over again. So I am literally just rotating my paper every time, and I'm shading those in carefully. At this point, because I'm using just a tiny bit of pressure, I do want to be very aware to stay inside the lines, because it will get a little more difficult to erase as you add more and more layers, and as you add a little pressure, you definitely want to look at your shading. So as I'm shading this, I'm squinting my eyes to see where I need a little bit more shading to even things out. If for some reason you accidentally go too dark in one area, you can always use the kneaded eraser and tap, tap, tap. But the more layers you use, the better it's gonna look. You just wanna be very consistent, keep your shading close together. Sometimes I use a term called scumbling, where I just start shading it in, but I use kind of like loose coils or loose circles just to kind of fill some areas in. But your goal with box number 4 is that you want a distinct difference between looking at 1, 2, 3, and 4. So definitely number 4 is looking pretty good. It's nice and blended. If you squint your eyes, you can probably see right here I needed to add a little bit more shading, but that's looking pretty good. So if you haven't cleaned up your edges for box 4, do so now. But right now, if yours looks like mine, you're on the right track. So nice even blending, nice crisp edges. This is a really good example. So that's it for this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next video for box number 5.